I'm Rachel with the Charlotte Mason Plenary. Thank you for joining me again for another video in our series, Finding Your Way with Charlotte Mason's 20 Principles. Today, we are talking about Principles 9 and 10. A child's mind is a spiritual organism with an appetite for all knowledge. We hold that the child's mind is no mere sack to hold ideas, but it is rather, if the figure may be allowed, a spiritual organism with an appetite for all knowledge. This is its proper diet with which it is prepared to deal and what it is able to digest and assimilate as the body does foodstuffs. Such a doctrine as the Herbartian, that the mind is a receptacle, lays the stress of education, the preparing of food and enticing morsels duly ordered, upon the teacher. Children taught in this principle are in danger of receiving much teaching but little knowledge. The teacher's axiom being, what a child learns matters less than how he learns it. Now, Charlotte discusses these principles in Chapter 7 of Volume 6, and the chapter is titled, How We Make Use of Mind. And it's an interesting title for the chapter because in these principles, she is discussing how we as parents and teachers approach education. And the first thing that she does in this chapter is go on a bit of a rant against an educational philosophy that was popular at the time that she was completely against. And it's the philosophy of Johann Friedrich Herbart. Now, we're going to take a little bit of time to get to know this Herbart character because Charlotte mentions his name more than 30 times throughout her 6 volumes. Johann Friedrich Herbart was a German philosopher who founded the academic study known as pedagogy, or the study of the theory and practice of education. He believed that every child is born with a unique potential, but that this potential remained unfulfilled until it was analyzed and transformed by education or by the teacher. Now, Herbart believed that a child had no innate ideas, no pre-established personality or thought. And of course, that goes against Charlotte's principle number 1, that children are born persons. And here she is quoting Herbart in Chapter 7. The soul has no capacity nor faculty whatever either to receive or produce anything. It is therefore no tabula rasa in the sense that impressions, foreign to its nature, may be made on it. Also, it is no substance, neither ideas nor feelings nor desires. Further, within it lie no forms of intuition and thought, no laws of willing and acting, nor any sort of predisposition. In other words, Herbart believed that a child was a blank slate. In fact, the term tabula rasa in Latin actually means blank slate. And Herbart believed that it was the teacher's responsibility to fill that blank slate, or to pour in the correct ideas and to mold a child through education. And one of the ways in which he said that a teacher could do this was by using a concentration scheme. Now, listen to the next quote and tell me if it reminds you of an education technique that is commonly used today. A successful and able modern educationalist gives us a valuable introduction to Herbartian principles and, by way of example, a Robinson Crusoe concentration scheme. First, we have 9 lessons in literature and language, the subjects being such as Robinson climbs a hill and finds he is on an island. Then, 10 object lessons, of which the first is the sea, the second, a ship from foreign parts, the 6th, a lifeboat, the 7th, shellfish, the 10th, a cave. Then, drawing lessons, probably as many, a boat, a ship, an oar, an anchor, and so on. Then follows a series on manual training, still built upon Robinson. The first, a model of the seashore, then models of Robinson's Island, of Robinson's house, and Robinson's pottery. Then a year's work on soap, its manufacture, ingredients, the soap trade, soap transport, the uses of soap, how to make out a soap invoice, the sorts of soap, and so on ad infinitum. It's a unit study, and Charlotte goes on to describe her disdain for all sorts of unit studies and gives examples about one using apples and another one all about the Spanish Armada. So what is it about a unit study that Charlotte does not like, that makes it incompatible with her method? Well, first, it places the burden of education solely on the teacher and not the student, because it maintains that the teacher is the source of all knowledge. A scheme which throws the whole burden of education on the teacher, which exalts the personality of the teacher as the chief agent in education, which affords ingenious, interesting, and more or less creative work to a vast number of highly intelligent and devoted persons, whose passionate hope is to leave the world a little better than they found it by means of those children whom they have raised to a higher level, must needs make a wide and successful appeal. It appeals equally to education committees and school managers. It relies upon the notion that teachers are compendiums of all knowledge, that they have but, as it were, to turn on the tap and the necessary knowledge flows forth. Now, back when we first started homeschooling, I tried a few unit studies, as I'm sure you probably have as well. And I thought they were a lot of fun, and my kids had a lot of fun. But what I quickly realized was that it took me a lot of work to put it together, and I learned a lot and thought it was a lot of fun. But in the end, my children retained nothing from those unit studies. Now, getting back to what Charlotte says about unit studies, she goes so far as to say that unit studies are actually an insult to the student. Of one thing we may be sure, an utter distaste, a loathing on the part of the children ever after, not only for Robinson Crusoe, but for every one of the subjects lugged in to illustrate his adventures. We read elsewhere of an apple affording a text for 100 lessons, including the making of a ladder in paper to gather the apples. But alas, the eating of the worn-out apple is not suggested. The author whom we quote for Robinson Crusoe we refrain from naming because, as a Greek chorus might say, we cannot praise it. The conscientious, ingenious, and laborious teachers who produce these concentration series are little aware that each such lesson is an act of insult. The children who are capable of and eager for a wide range of knowledge and literary expression are reduced to inanities. A lifelong ennui is set up. Every approach to knowledge suggests adventures for boredom, and the children's minds sicken and perish long before their school days come to an end. So the Herbartian philosophy of unit studies lays the burden of education on the teacher, and as Charlotte says, children taught on this philosophy are in danger of receiving much teaching but little knowledge. So Charlotte says no to unit studies, and mainly because she believes that all education is really self-education. So does that mean that your child can't go down that rabbit hole and explore interest-based learning? No, of course not, because there is room for that in a Charlotte Mason education. But those sorts of things are done in the child's own time, usually in the afternoons, not during lessons. So yes, let your child plan handicrafts and a menu all around Little House on the Prairie, or let her spend hours reading books on paleontology and dinosaurs and making dinosaurs out of clay and measuring the stride of a T-Rex's footsteps. All of that has room for expression and exploration in a Charlotte Mason education. But the difference is that the student digs for the information herself. She takes the responsibility, and she isn't a passive recipient of the information. Or as Charlotte says, the ideas for the sustenance of children are to be found mainly in books of literary quality. Given these, the mind does for itself the sorting, arranging, selecting, rejecting, classifying, which Herbart leaves to the struggle of the promiscuous ideas which manage to cross the threshold. Now, in Chapter 7, Charlotte also discusses another danger of the Herbart philosophy, and that is that education should be utilitarian in its purpose, rather than inspiring, full of ideas and ideals. And here, she quotes a Herbert Allen Fisher, who happened to be a member of the British Parliament and was president of the Board of Education at the time. The student can only be elevated by ideas which act upon the imagination and act upon the character and influence the soul, and it is the function of all good teachers to bring those ideas before them. And here Charlotte gives us a warning by comparing the educational systems of some Scandinavian countries with that of Germany. And remember here that Charlotte wrote all of this in the aftermath of World War I. Denmark and Scandinavia have tried this generous policy of educating young people not according to the requirements of their trade, but according to their natural capacity to know and their natural desire for knowledge. That desire to know history, poetry, science, art, which is natural to every man. And the success of the experiment, now a century old, is an object lesson for the rest of the world. Germany has pursued a different ideal. Her efforts too have been great, unified by the idea of utility. And if we will only remember the lesson, the war has shown us how futile is an education which affords no moral or intellectual uplift, no motive higher than the learner's peculiar advantage and that of the state. Germany became morally bankrupt for a season only, let us hope, not solely because of the war, but as the result of an education which ignored the things of the spirit. Instead, she says that education should be teaching students how to live a full and rich life, and not merely how to earn a living. A well-educated man with cultivated imagination, trained judgment, wide interests, is prepared to master the intricacies of any profession, while he knows at the same time how to make use of himself, of the powers with which nature and education have endowed him for his own happiness, the delightful employment of his leisure, for the increased happiness of his neighbors and the well-being of his community. That is, such a man is able not only to earn his living, but to live. So, in Principles 9 and 10, Charlotte is telling us what education should not be, and she's also reaffirming her belief that a child's mind is a spiritual organism that desires all knowledge. And she believes that self-education is truly the only education. Now for homework. Please read Chapter 7 of Volume 6. You can download the entire chapter as a free PDF over on the Plenary website, and I've also included some study questions for you at the end of the PDF, and I'll put a link to that in the description. And if you've liked my video, please give me a big thumbs up and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Be sure to click that little bell so that you get a notification about each new video in the series. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope to chat with you soon.